Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the bully of Skidmore, part 11. This is the story of Ken Rex McElroy. When we last left off, we had talked about how McFadden and McElroy would go to trial after McElroy had shot Ernest Bowman-Camp, and they would actually find him guilty and sentence him to 6 years. But after the trial, they would give him at least 25 to 30 days to kind of gather his affairs in order before sentencing. And it is at this time, right afterwards, that he would actually go into a tavern and would actually show the people of Skidmore a rifle and would say that he was going to use it to kill Ernest Bowman-Camp. And at this particular tavern, the owner, Greg Clement, would actually go and tell another tavern owner, which resided in Skidmore as well, by Pete Ward. And when he had heard this, he had decided to take it upon himself to kind of see what legal action could be done with Ken Rex McElroy. And that is where he had actually contacted the Sheriff Marshal Department, and they suggested that he do a petition. And so he had gathered information from over 60 different people to gather this petition. And when the petition was going to be set on trial, McFadden would go ahead and stretch it to a later date. And the date that they originally set was for July 10th, 1981. And when all 60 people came to this petition and found out it was at a later court date, Pete Ward had decided at that point in time to hold a meeting in Skidmore about Ken Rex McElroy. To say that everyone and their sister was invited to this meeting is quite an understatement. This was a meeting in town hall that Pete Ward had organized, and he would have everyone in Skidmore that had been affiliated with Ken Rex McElroy, including the farmers that he had been robbing his entire life, was at this meeting. Not to mention retired David Dunbar, Sheriff Marshal, and even the mayor. And a lot of the people in this meeting had discussed about how they just wanted to just end Ken Rex McElroy. And Dunbar, who had been a sheriff marshal, fearing that this was going to turn into something very grim, he tried to calm this angry mob growing and tell them, listen, don't blow him away. If he retaliates and uses any kind of force like a weapon, etc., by all means, you can go and fight back. But don't just go out there and just blow him away. And he was really trying to avoid anybody doing any other time. But it is at this time, around the time that Dunbar was trying to calm the mob down, a person ran into the town hall and would tell this mob that Ken Rex McElroy was at Greg Clement's tavern. And it is at this point that the angry mob completely rushed over. Moments prior to the meeting, Ken Rex McElroy would actually be sitting at his home, where his brother would actually come inside the house and tell him, the entire town is at a town hall meeting and they're talking about you. It is at this point that he got up and he told Trina, come on, we're going to go to the tavern. Trina McElroy would later say that she regrets ever getting in the truck with Ken McElroy that day. She would say that they would get in the truck, they would go into the tavern and sit down. And she would say that as they sat down, there was nobody in the tavern. And they would just sit at the bar and have their drinks. And then she would say later on, everyone and their sister would just pile into this tavern, just staring at Trina and Ken McElroy. And she would also notice that everyone was having drinks at the bar, but nobody was paying for them. But still, there was a lot of people looking at Ken McElroy. It is at this time that Ken McElroy would look at Trina and say, "Come on, let's go get in the truck." And he would actually purchase a 6-pack of beer and a pack of cigarettes. And he would go into the parking lot and sit in his Silverado and would smoke a cigarette. What happened later is hard to tell. But Ken McElroy would be sitting in his truck with Trina, and all of a sudden, 4 or 5 men walked up to the front of the truck. And Ken McElroy, like his normal stance, would try to intimidate them by looking at them, puffing out smoke, and revving up his truck. It is at this point that these men picked up rifles and began firing at blank range. Trina McElroy would say that she was screaming and ducking, and all she could hear was just shattering glass and gunshots. It is at that time that she felt the door on the passenger side open up and yanked out of the truck. It was actually Greg Clement, the tavern owner, who had actually yanked Trina out of the truck. And he would actually whisper in her ear, "Shut up, stop screaming, or they'll kill you too." Trina would also say during this that a woman would actually lean over and whisper in her ear, "You brought this on yourself." They say that Ken McElroy was killed by the first bullet that went through the windshield that hit him in the head. But between 4 rifles, he was shot, I think, a total of 17 different times. The people of Skidmore wouldn't even report this or call the cops for it for another 60 minutes. And upon hearing it on the radio, David Dunbar would actually go with the police into the crime scene. And he would look around to everyone who was sitting around and say, "I told you not to blow him away, God damn it." The police would look at the crime scene and they would think that they would have an answer. But considering that they had 60 witnesses that witnessed this crime, and ironically enough, every single person in Skidmore would say the same thing: "I never saw a thing." The one thing they did learn about Ken Rex McElroy is that if you don't confess to a crime, there's no crime to confess to. The police would eventually interrogate every single person in Skidmore, and they would all say the same thing: "I didn't see anything." And even a church lady who had been seen reading her Bible during the shooting, they would approach her, and her house actually sat right in front of the truck. And they would walk up and ask her what happened on that day. And she would look at the police and say he was just a man that needed killing. To this day, Ken Rex McElroy's murder remains unsolved. And it didn't stop there. After the events, the people of Skidmore would actually chase off any remaining family members of Ken Rex McElroy, and the house that he used to live at mysteriously had burned down. And again, nobody confessed to anything, nor did anyone bring it up. Trina McElroy would actually go and sue Skidmore for about $2 million and would have McFadden at her side. And she would use the names that she saw shooting her husband. But the court would actually say there was not enough evidence to prove that those men were the men that shot her husband. And therefore, her eyewitness account was unrefuted. And she would not win the $2 million lawsuit, but she would be awarded about $117,000. And with the money she had gotten, she would actually move out of Skidmore and remarry. Trina McElroy would live a full life, and she passed away on January 12th, 2012. I think it is a crazy story, and there's not a lot to say about Ken Rex McElroy, but I have to agree with the people of Skidmore. He was a man that just needed killing.